And so I want to introduce Shasta Keating. I went to my friend. I went to Mrs. GPT this time. And she had this to say about Shasta. Shasta Keating is a seasoned leader, peppery, in the nonprofit technology and digital inclusion, currently serving as vice president of TechSoup. They had you with something else. Shasta's work focuses on forging strategic partnerships across sectors to bridge the digital divide, particularly for underserved communities. She's collaborated with major technology companies like Cisco and Meta to advance digital inclusion efforts. Her initiatives often address critical issues such as cognitive disabilities, mental health challenges, domestic violence, and climate action, aiming to empower nonprofits with the tools and knowledge needed to make lasting impact. Beyond her role at TechSoup, Shasta is the CEO of Artisan, close enough, LLC, in case you want to sue them, it's an LLC there, where she continues to advocate for digital equity and responsible technology use in the nonprofit sector. Her commitment to building bridges across sectors underscores her dedication to creating a more inclusive and technologically empowered civil society. A little applause. Okay. You've met the other folks, and so what I want to ask them to do is to start by telling you how they got engaged in AI. Now, you've heard from some of them, so they may change their story at that point. Why they think it's important, and how they're engaged with it, and what they think the nonprofit sector might get value out of it. And again, some of this is repetitive. In addition to that, one of the goals here is to give you all a chance, not just to ask questions, but to identify what you'd like to further learn about, because this is a continuing process from our perspective. So somebody I spoke to already talked about ethics, the ethics involved in doing this sort of stuff. So let me just tell you before we get into this, how I've used AI or ChatGPT. So I have a weird mind, as you may already have guessed. So when I got home after our December 24th, 2024 lunch with Willie and Brian, thank you, with an O, Brian with an O, okay. The first thing I did was ask ChatGPT, to do my obituary from the point of view of somebody who doesn't like me. Because one of the things that Brian emphasized in that conversation was you need to give the tool a personality. So I figured that was a good personality. I then showed it to my wife, who didn't know the angle, and she thought it was pretty accurate. I also did a friend's from the point of view, her obituary from the point of view of a jilted lover. And it went on that her name is Francois. Francois is a kind, considerate person. If only she'd been that way with me. So I say that because the way I got comfortable was by playing with it. Okay? Now I have friends who are afraid of it having me want to write their obituaries. It's also much faster than Siri. I don't use Google search anymore. I just put in ChatGPT about anything and etc. Doing research. I was interested the other day about Native American sites in the area. 5 seconds later, I've got my itinerary plotted out. Another way, just in terms of ideas, is I did a presentation for the National Forum on Black Public Administrators on transitioning from public administration to nonprofits. Um, Within less than a minute, it had an outline for me. Now, I've done that before, so I used the outline against what I had a few pointers I didn't think about. I then asked it to do images for me, which it did. And I was able to make changes in the image that would be more appropriate. And it was just fantastic. So that's a way, that's a practical use. Um, my wife is teaching a class at UT on effective meetings. She asked me to do some images. I did them about people sitting around a meeting room. She said to me, nobody wears ties anymore. So I changed them by asking. I think Brian showed an example and said informal dress. Okay. She wanted a more diverse group. Presto, I had a more diverse group. So, those are very, very, very practical stuff, as well as helping to create logos and images and so forth. So, that's enough about me. What do you think about me? No. No. So, gentlemen and ladies, if you would start with, and maybe Shasta, how did you get involved in AI? And some recommendations. And then we will then open it up to questions or conversations.
Is this one on?
Thank you, Bear. So yeah, there is still use for us humans. Now, can you guys hear me? Yep. So thank you, Barry, for having us. He's been a joy. I've enjoyed every single joke, and it actually has lightened my heart in an otherwise kind of complex environment for nonprofits this year. So I'm really happy to be here. So happy that you are here, and looking forward to sharing about my journey. It's interesting to think Barry had prepared us kindly for the questions he was going to ask. And so AI helped me to prepare what I was going to say in 5 minutes before our forum started. And so I quickly went and I did all my research and I put the talking points together. And I was thinking, gosh, when did my journey start? And so the one thing that we should all feel very comfortable about is that Brian did say that this journey started in the 60s, and I think that's true. My journey started probably in the 2000s when I worked for the Accenture Chief Technology Officer's person, that he was the Chief Science Officer, and he was doing machine learning. And I remember we would sit in meetings and talk about how one day printers would be notified automatically that ink was empty and that it should be replenished. We didn't think that pink printers would actually become obsolete in our children's lives, but this is what we did. It went on with my work as a research fellow at the Institute for Strategic Change, where I worked for a brilliant human being, and his name is Tom Davenport. And if you're looking for just resources, he's very focused on the private sector, but the lessons from the private sector can be applied to our sector. And you might enjoy things like competing on analytics or big data at work, which he's written, and also All In on AI, which is a wonderful book to start with. There's another book on the way and lots of articles on AI for nonprofits. And I think, to quickly move from that private sector lens to our sector is so important. But it's a great starting point. So that's where my journey began. Now I do work for TechSoup, and I feel so lucky to work for TechSoup and also to work under the leadership of Marnie, because Marnie does technology with a heart for the civil sector, for civil society. I mean, it's very empowering and inspiring how she understands civil society, and I learn from that every single time I'm with her. I also love learning about, what it is sort of from our heads. I do a lot of thought leadership on AI. I think a lot about AI, and I'll share that in Barry's question of how we use AI. So really happy to be here, and thank you very much for having me.
Awesome. So yeah, I guess, think about where my journey started. I went to college and grad school in the 90s. So, and I had gone in for computer science, didn't go in thinking I would necessarily focus on AI, but as I kind of went through my undergraduate studies, learned more about it, that was where I gravitated. And, you know, thinking about like just one of the reasons that it's actually fun to think back on this because I was thinking about what to say here, like one of the reasons that I have it's pretty easy, it's been easier for me, I think, to like adopt this technology and kind of contextualize it is, I think back to what we were doing now, like I was, there's kind of two branches of AI. I won't get too deep and technical, but there's like symbolic AI, which is kind of more rules-based systems, which was like kind of a lot of the AI from like the 60s to about the 90s was really focused on that. And there's still things going on there. A lot of the most interesting stuff now is actually combining the two, but symbolic AI is really just the idea that this is not machine learning. These aren't like trained models. These are building rules-based systems, sometimes very elaborate rules-based systems, but still places where you've kind of hard-coded all the rules of the system into place in some fashion. And then there's the machine learning. And when I was doing particularly grad school, then we were studying machine learning, all the same foundations of like what all these large language models and things were built on, but we didn't have powerful enough computers to actually do it, and there wasn't enough data to actually train it on to do anything like what we do now. There weren't kind of off-the-shelf libraries like PyTorch and the things that people use to build these things now. We were like handwriting matrix math, right? It was like we're like hand doing linear algebra and proving mathematically that these things are equivalent to this whole neural model. But the thing that my research group at Case Western actually did was we built these first simulated and then actually physically manifested robot cockroaches. And we partnered with the biology group. Why cockroaches? Cockroaches have less than 300 neurons in their entire nervous system. Their brain stem, like 300, less than 300 neurons. And what we built was a realistic simulated cockroach with the simulated neurons, proving that all this matrix math and this fancy machine learning linear algebra stuff actually does the same thing, roughly speaking, as this very simple neural system. And we could do some pretty, like, we had some of those pretty amazing, like, wow, we thought this would work, but it's really magical to see where the gait that a cockroach walks in is basically a direct function of the way that their neurons are connected in a network. And we prove that by basically just building out these simulated neural systems with matrices, running the simulation, and putting a cockroach here and saying, your goal is to go over there and get food. And it would eventually, and at first it would just twitch its legs, and it would eventually figure out it would learn how to walk, and it would get up and walk in a very recognizable pattern. We did the same thing with we physically built cockroach robots, wired in this neuron brain, same exact effect. No one programmed in here is how you walk as a cockroach. We simply said, go learn this by observing by reflecting on your own behavior as you try to get across the room. And so for me, it's like, when now what we're doing with large language models is the same thing, except it's not 300 neurons. It's these massive GPU powered machines that take tens of millions of dollars to train it on all the data on the internet. But we see the same kind of behavior. You take this system that's as close as we're able to approximate roughly how we think some parts of our brain work, and I won't get into it's not an exact correlate, but it's the same kind of thing. And so that's really what's been my driver for all the way through. I mean, I haven't kind of focused in deep AI research for most of my career. I mostly have gone and done other kind of more mainstream data management things, but that research then was really kind of the core of what I did, and I've just stayed close to AI all the way through. And now these last few years, we've really, with all the developments that have happened in the last 25 years, we're able to basically do these cognitively similar human tasks. And for me, it was obvious when I saw what we could do with the cockroaches. I was like, well, with enough time and technology and speed and Moore's law and all of these things, we're going to be able to simulate really sophisticated human behavior in exactly the same way. It's just going to take however long it takes us to build powerful enough computers and have enough data to do it. And so that's been my journey. It's been super interesting to watch. And then I'll wrap up because I'm getting long-winded. I think Barry asked also, like, how do I think this can apply to nonprofits? Probably pretty obvious from my presentation, a lot of my thoughts on that. But I'll say I didn't make this point during the talk, and I'll make it now. Like when I brought up the Shopify CEO and his statements around, you can't hire anyone new if you haven't proved you can't do the job with AI. I think that's really relevant to this group in the sense that, like, Shopify is a very wealthy company who could hire as many people as they want to get the job done. I think it tends to be the case more often in nonprofits that it's hard to find the funding to bring in that next person. It's hard to get qualified volunteer labor. You're always kind of feeling resource strapped. And I think this is an unlock that for this community is like, just, it's necessary to be competitive and get the mission done. Because I truly think that you can't hand over the reins to AI and do it with no people, but you can magnify the output of your people the people you do have quite substantially if they learn how to use these tools.
Testing. Okay. Um, reflecting on how I got into AI, I had to go back to how I got into computer science, technology. I grew up as a kid in Texas, segregated schools. I went to finally in junior high and high school, went to integrated schools. And it was a good thing because it was one of the better schools in the state of Texas. And I wrote my first program in BASIC on this device that was like a tape, and you punched holes in it, and it read the program, 1973. So I've been doing technology work. If we start with that, back over 50 years, right? And the rest of my life was like a dream deferred. I didn't wake up Dr. Adams, right? I was a little black kid growing up in that part of Texas with all of the things of the culture, but I had this quest for wanting to know more and learn more. And when the school's integrated and I went to the school and I started doing programming, that was a resource that became available to me, right? And I went on to college, military, and then college, and I learned a lot of technology in college. And in college, I took a course in art. They call it artificial intelligence. It was nothing like what we have today. It was this language called Lisp, and it was like you had to learn all these rules. Oh my God, it was crazy. It was crazy. But if you were a geeky kind of person, it was wonderful. And so I went on to get my master's in software engineering from UT, and we had to do some analysis and projects, and we were dabbling. And I had colleagues. I worked for Dell at the time, and I had colleagues from IBM and the other big companies. Back then, that was 97. We didn't have Google here. We didn't have Meta. We didn't have all of the big players. We had IBM. We had Motorola. We had 3M and Dell. And so we all worked collectively, and we did little projects like the Roach thing, and so we could learn the technologies. And then I went on, and I kept thinking. I was involved in my church as a deacon, working with kids. We started this rites of passage program for African American kids to help them through. And some of them, if I tell you the stories of how they turned out, you would be surprised with the family background. But I had an interest on how do we learn, and how do these kids having so much trouble in these schools, how are we going to get them so that they can be good citizens for the next generation, break that cycle? And I pursued the PhD in curriculum and instruction at UT, and in particular, instructional technology, where I had an opportunity to do research and work with building communities of practice, doing collaborative assessments and learning, going into schools and helping build up the capability of the reading curriculum across the state, and also STEM. We did the first STEM center and math and science. So I was able to use my technology skills and my interests. This is a long story. And my interest in wanting to help these families and kids and people like me who grew up the way I did, who don't have resources and capability. And so, in some of that, we did some of the work in research on how to use technology to scaffold that. And so I did the 30 years with the state and UT and the departments, and all of a sudden, in the last year or so, like Brian said, it just popped up. Now it's available to everybody, right? And what I'm interested in going forward and working with any of you guys is, how do we get it in the hands of folks who can use it? How can we transform our culture? And how can we equalize it and democratize it? And so that's my why, and then that's my importance. Thanks.
Thank you. So my professional training is as a short story writer. And that may not seem relevant to AI, but it is. Because to write a great short story, you have to have a lot of content. You have to know somebody's backstory. You have to know what they don't like for breakfast. You have to know, and most of those things don't end up in the final story, but it's what makes the final story consistent. So that ability that I learned to be able to draw out details and then figure out how to synthesize the telling ones so that somebody else could imagine all the things you didn't say. Because that's what's different about a short story than a novel. A novel puts all the things in it. It's got time to stretch out. You know, a short story drops you into a moment, and it turns out that those skills are excellent at helping you design technology and bringing communities together and figuring out the details that make a difference to somebody in building a piece of technology and making it work for them in the ways they intend. And saying, out of all the things you want to do, what's the most relevant thing? What's the thing that holds the other stuff? What's the impact that you want this to have in your community, and what's the change that you want it to make? So being able to do that and build the Caravan Studios, the organization we've mentioned a couple times, we build technology, but with communities, not because any one person has a good idea, but because a room comes together and says, human trafficking isn't tolerable in our city anymore, and we want to see if technology can support us in stopping it, right? So it starts with that commitment to making a change and the community coming together. And I think that at its best, AI has the potential of working like that, because we're putting together this corpus of data that reflects what we care about so that we can get better synthesized outputs that support us in making the change. Now, sometimes that output might look like a grant document. It might look like an analysis of a spreadsheet. It might look like code, you know, depending on who you are, or if you're into vibe coding, which is a lot of fun. And, you know, so you know, that output is going to change, but it's about us putting the inputs together that make it different. At its worst, I think we've ceded the control of that to tech companies and the corpus of the internet in general without discrimination. So I think that for me, those skills that say, these are the things we need to know so that we can start to synthesize and streamline and end up with an end product. AI is awesome at doing the end product, but that first part, you still have to know, and I think it's better as a community. And I know that's it's not a technical answer. That's not the background I have, actually. I love technology, and I will play with any tool. And my idea of an awesome weekend is to, sit there and build. I have a Gemini gem called Eager Intern, actually. To build and do those kinds of things. But my perspective is as a user. And so I think the skills that we have to bring to it are the skills of discrimination in what goes into the output, and helping surface the things that we probably know that aren't well included today. And we probably know because those are the folks we're helping. The nonprofits we help are the ones that aren't buying big, giant technology solutions. We know what they need and what their problems are. So I think, that gets at how I started and I think the promise of it and the thing we have to guard against.